Laura, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and how about Hank vote?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Give another minute or people who were here a minute ago to filter back in.
She had to get something.
Good evening, everybody. We'll call this meeting of the Jefferson City Council Budget Committee to order. I have 5:32 on my clock. Ms. Donaldson, would you call the roll, please?
Fitzwater?
Present.
Graham?
Here.
Hensley?
Present.
Hussey?
Here.
Kimna? Lester?
Here.
Schreiber?
Present.
Vogt?
Here.
Ward?
Here.
Wiseman?
Great, thank you very much. So this is our first evening of committee discussion. We've had a couple meetings of department presentations, and those have been very helpful. And tonight is the first time that we get together and sort of try to hash out any revised spending ideas that we may want to pursue, and then start to land the plane, hopefully sometime soon, on this budget process. Just real briefly, I'll just run through what we might expect to see generally as we go through these next couple meetings. First of all, these meetings now will be limited to 90 minutes. So at the end of an hour and a half, we're going to adjourn at a natural spot and come back. There's no need to, hold exhaustion meetings or anything like that. And during the meetings, newer revised spending proposals can be thrown out there and placed on what we call the parking lot, which we'll see in a minute, which looks a whole lot like an Excel spreadsheet. And a majority vote's not needed to put something on the parking lot. It just needs to be requested by the person who's offering the idea at the time. But by the end of the next meeting, an offsetting funding source should be identified. And then that new item plus the partner funding source needs to be approved by a majority of the council, a majority of the committee. And that we'll do that first by voice vote as a group, and if that sounds too close, we'll do a roll call vote. And if it's not passed, it's removed from the parking lot, but don't worry, because you can come back and try it again later if you think you find a better way. Once the budget is balanced and there are no more items for discussion, this committee will vote on whether to approve the budget and send it on to the city council for final adoption, at which point we'll all get to vote on it again. So we're in the committee discussion portion of this meeting and this process now. And just a few observations that I'll share at this point. We started hearing about a 0.25% drop in projected revenue that's going to, relative to the fiscal year 2020 adopted budget. So, even before we were looking at new requested spending items, about $85,000 had to be trimmed from last year's budget to this year's budget. And nearly 80% of the general fund budget is on personnel services. So that's salaries, insurance, other benefits. And, you know, I think one of the things that was surprising to me, I don't know if it was surprising to any of my colleagues, was that I assumed, or I'd hoped, that the 1 to 2% per year cost of living increases that are applied to city staff salaries for over the last several years were actually allowing them to at least keep up with inflation. And I think what was made clear early on in this process was that we haven't even been coming close to keeping up with the consumer price index figures that were shared for our people with this approach. So I was kind of surprised by that. And we were also now aware of some salary inconsistency concerns affecting some departments, as well as the fact that the salaries offered within our police department are not sufficiently competitive with other law enforcement agencies in our region, which has led to us losing some well-trained, great police officers. And we do thank the Fraternal Order of Police and Officers Ambler and Bowman, the Fraternal Order of Police's president and vice president, for all of their time, their hard work, and their communication with us on this. I think we are all now more educated on this topic than we perhaps ever been, and I know there's a lot of commitment to finding a solution to these problems. And finally, all of these revenue and salary issues don't even really take into account the constantly growing list of necessary building maintenance projects, vehicle equipment replacement needs across all of our departments. So it's certainly a challenging budget environment. And just thanks again to all of the city staff who've worked hard on their own and with us to make this process as easy on us as it could possibly be, and to keep us informed all the time. So I've sort of sent some parking lot items in for preloading, and those will go up whenever. And I don't intend on pulling those up or moving for a vote on those tonight or anything, but and I think that they're pretty self-explanatory also, though I'd be happy at some point to answer questions. And my priority here was just to find, these are essentially public safety, infrastructure, vehicle, and equipment spending priorities that are either taking, reusing funds that have already been dedicated to like fire department capital projects, or that are coming out of the capital improvement sales tax. And both of these, there are limitations on what we can use them for. So you'll see what I've proposed using them for is vehicles and radio equipment and some firehouse for rehab, and a couple other items. So I'll leave those up there. I mean, I'd like, ultimately, if those could be passed as a slate, though a motion could be made at some point and a majority vote taken to remove certain items for individual attention, or to have currently listed items replaced by new ideas, and that's just how the process goes. So after I filibustered for 7 minutes, I will open it up for further discussion by the committee. Any council or any committee member wish to be heard? Councilmember Graham.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of from the mayor to her proposed budget, to city administrator, to each director for their thoughts on what's certainly needed to help move the city of Jefferson forward. So I appreciate the time and effort that was given and spent as you looked at what's needed for your department with those pink sheet items. I just want to say that we have heard from, and I think that Mr. Chair, you had mentioned this a while ago, we heard from the FOP, and I know they presented to public safety as well as to the Finance Committee. And the numbers, the disparity in pay, the way that we're losing officers, those things are quite disturbing to me. We all want to live in a community in which we feel safe, and I think that part of that, a majority of that, is making sure that our police force has the things in which they need to help continue to keep us safe. And I thought about this for a while, and I said from day one that I was committed to one of the things is being public safety, and certainly I do remain committed to public safety. So I'm not going to filibuster, Mr. Chair, but I do want to add to the parking lot $205,000 to go towards police for pay. I think the total was $800,000 that they needed to deal with compression, to deal with starting salaries for police officers. No, we can't find the $800,000, but I am putting, I'd like to put in the parking lot $225,000 solely for police, so that we can start to make some adjustments in the area of starting salary for police officers, as well as look at some of the compression issues that we have. So that is what I would like to put on the parking lot.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham. And I'll ask a question following up on that, and I'll open it to any of our informed staff members who can answer it. If we're looking for additional personnel services money, are we limited in our revenue sources for where we might find money to move over for this purpose in the general fund?
Well, because this is for police, it has to be out of the general fund.
Thank you. Okay. But there are no revenue sources feeding the general fund that would be potentially off limits for this purpose. But also,
I'm not sure what your offset is.
yeah. Okay.
So there are some revenues, I know that they're specifically identified for particular uses within the general fund other than being in the general fund. So, but the budget is, and just remember there's two main things. One, the budget is presented by the mayor, balanced, but a big part of that was the use of the coronavirus money in transit. So that money, is trying to build in over a 3-year period. And so just remember that in 3 years, you're going to have that big hunk of 3 years worth of, what is it, $1.23 that will be, also needs to be kept in mind.
So without that, this year we would have had to have found other money from the general fund to supplement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And in 3 years' time, what's bolstering it right now won't be there anymore.
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. And certainly one thing we can always do is look at additional revenue sources, and I know the mayor's been having some discussions on those longer-term kinds of ideas, or make expenditure cuts.
And I'd just like to pick up on what was said. I think certainly outside this budget process, we need to, as a council, look at the long-term needs of public safety, both police and fire, because within this budget itself, we're not going to make much headway on the issues and the needs that we've observed.
I agree. I bet a lot of us agree.
Councilman Hensley?
Mayor Turkey.
And I would agree, and just to reiterate what Steve said, I think that there is some potential for new revenue sources that We had mentioned in my original letter, I know one of those is the potential use tax, and that's something that's been discussed, and I know there's been some renewed interest in that as well from the community members that really think that's a potential option, so there may be some potential for some of these things too, and again, I do share Steve's concern with the transit subsidy, so with the knowing that we're going to have to deal with that too, but I do think there's a lot of potential for future revenue sources to look at seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and, we've been seeing for some time some troubling trends on the slowing of revenue growth and the decrease in revenue projections. So, so some hard choices or some, exploring new options, certainly some paths that we need to explore. Any other comments, Councilmember Fitzwater?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate Councilman Graham's comments, and I would like to place 2 additional police vehicles on the parking lot just for a discussion point. That gets us, I think the mayor had put 5 in the proposed budget. With the 3, that gets us to 8. 2 more would get us to 10, which would be the 9 plus making up 1 for last year and trying to get ahead of this a little bit. I also had a general question. I don't really have a dollar amount, but I know we've discussed it before in the budget committee and on the webinar that the mayor and Captain Wilde were on last night and Steve was on. There was discussion about the body cameras, which we have talked about before, and I know that we cannot afford, especially the number that the captain had at least, which I think was a several-year-old number. He did indicate that he thought technology, that number had come down some, so it's heading in the right direction. My question is there a midpoint, something we could do in the short term that would help the police department until we get to the point where we can figure out what the real cost is going to be to do it right across the department? So it's not really, I guess, a parking lot number, but it's a question that if we could come to some number that I'd be willing to put up there, but I don't know, the number may be out of our reach.
Are you talking along the lines of perhaps not being able to purchase enough body cams to cover the entire department, but to partially cover the department, or to cover some of the needs?
Well, I don't know if there's a way, and I know and legally, I mean, Ryan may say this is crazy, you can't do part and not, but if there's, like SWAT teams or folks that are going to be in situations where maybe that would help. And I know we've relieved some of that through the use of drones, and that's helped, kind of it's not the 10,000-foot view, but, 100-foot or however high the drones fly. But it's still not like being on the ground. But, again, based on his comments and, based on what we've talked about before, we probably can't afford to do it department-wide, but is there some middle ground that would give the community some comfort that we're looking at it? And I only raise it because he seemed to indicate that he was in 100% support when we could do it right. I'm saying, is there a way we can do it to give some comfort to the community until we can do it right, or do we need to just totally do it right and push it off to another year?
Those are great questions.
Well, I have a question on that. The current capital improvement sales tax expires when? Is it 2021? Or we have to renew in 21 and
We renew in 21, it expires April of 2022.
Okay. So potentially large ticket items like that, I know it doesn't answer the immediate need, but with that kind of dollar amount, it could be the kind of thing that's packaged together in a sales tax renewal of that kind, as opposed to trying to identify, $400,000 or more dollars in one budget for that particular purpose. When Councilman Fitzwater was talking about that, I wasn't thinking necessarily you'd buy some, or if you were even thinking about starting to set aside some dollars for the next few years just to hold, but I know that I don't know if one council can restrict a future council on money like that. I mean, it'd be subject to us, or the council in the future, you all, deciding that you might want to reallocate that another way, but I do appreciate that perspective and approach about an incremental approach in that regard.
If I could just follow up, and I apologize to the chief, because I have not discussed this with him, so if this is a crazy idea, just tell me it's a crazy idea. I heard it last night, I anticipated trying to do raise a question today, and I just had one of those days, but if there is something we can do, and the police department supports it, then I think the community would support it. If we say, hey, we're looking at it, we're going to do the best we can, and it's a year, 2 years off, I'm comfortable with that too, but if we can help our department, then I would be comfortable if we could come to a number that's reasonable, trying to find the funding to do it.
You know, I think this combination of approaches seems reasonable to me. I mean, the long-term, you know, putting it in the renewal package as an across-the-board, you know, full-scale purchase makes sense, but in the immediate term, you know, rather than putting it up on the parking lot tonight, it might be best if you could have some conversations before our next couple meetings, and then we could have a better idea of the direction the department thinks makes the most sense, and also an idea of what the attending cost might be, if that's all right with you. Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions by the committee? Any other comments or questions, topics of discussion by, Councilman?
I just
Councilman
want to
Lester?
put an item on the parking lot. Want to put the requested abatement money, $20,000. To me, that's a rare instance of I guess I'd call it a threefer. Abatement takes care of blight in our communities. It pays for itself, and history has shown that it even increases money in the budget. So I think that's well worthwhile to fund.
Which page of the budget are we on?
That's on page 186 under protective,
Sure.
planning and protective services. It's only $20,000 that's requested.
Was I hearing things, or did you say 40 a second ago, but it's 20? that we're on?
40,000.
Okay.
And I would also like to put, well, do you want to discuss that first?
Oh, feel free.
So another item within planning and protective services is money for demolition. I know meeting the housing authority, I know some of these, and personally I know some of these properties that need to be demolished or hazards to residents, well, to citizens and to some of them to adjacent property owners. I know it was requested, this is on page 187, $130,000, but I'm not sure how much I'd request for it, but certainly I think more money needs to be going to demolition. There's a long list of these properties that need to be taken down.
Okay, thank you. It looks like, were you adding the demo? Let's see.
For how much?
Did you want to go offer the full amount, or?
I would say $50,000.
Thank you. Any comments or questions about those two items? Okay. Steve and I had some back and forth today about FEMA reimbursement, and I wonder, Steve, would you be willing to give an update on estimates and anything we know about timing?
Go ahead. So, yeah, so we've got, and Margie's working on several projects, Margie and her staff on several reimbursement projects for FEMA. Most of the ones that we've been getting, I think, have all been in the enterprise, the airport and wastewater, correct? So, none of the general fund ones have come through yet. And a small for some vehicles. So overall, I think it's probably over $1 million-ish, maybe $1.5 million that we anticipate, but that depends on FEMA and what they prove and what comes through. And the timing of that, Margie, I don't know if you have a good sense of the timing, 6 to 8 months. I don't know if it's a year away or it's tough to tell. I mean, and we've always anticipated that when that money comes in, then it goes into fund balance, and then council has a discussion what to do at that particular time.
But the remaining amount, we don't think is tied to enterprise funds? It would be...
There are some enterprise fund-related ones out there, including parks and wastewater, but the $1.5 million-ish is probably a general fund number, but, that depends on FEMA's, what they authorize, what they approve.
So if that comes in at some point during the next fiscal year, I'm sure we'll reconvene or reconsider as a council a large supplemental appropriation slate of what to do with those funds if there's an intention to do something with it during the next fiscal year. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments?
I guess if I could just, since we're on that topic, feel compelled to say this, that the reason that we're able to do that with a tornado and a pandemic and hailstorms and flooding and all those other things going on, and the economy, is because you've had a healthy fund balance. We've had a healthy fund balance that's allowed us to be able to use some of, during the year, remember that was a conscious management decision that was made to be able to use and hold back a little bit on some of the funding, but use what we had during that year, so we didn't have to come and use fund balance. So it's kind of a circle that now, when it does get paid, that'll be an opportunity to come back into fund balance, and then you'll have that discussion as you noted. So
yeah, and one of my focuses on the little slate of items that I brought as homework was to use some of the money that's currently sitting in an appropriated item within the fund balance tally and keeping a certain amount in order to make sure that we stay at about 17.1%. So not spending the money that's already been appropriated, that's sitting there, letting it sit there, and certainly until this replenishment comes from FEMA, we hope, allowing us to maintain that healthy balance. Any comments or questions at this point?
I have a question about fund balance, and Margie, you don't have to get this information to me tonight, you probably don't have it, but in regards to the end of the year sweep of the different departments that have leftover monies that go towards the fund balance, what is the average, I guess, the past 5 years that has been the return back to the fund budget based on departments not spending their full amount of monies that was budgeted to them?
That was actually part of the discussion during the 5-year forecast, where we estimate at least 4% being
4%.
unexpended.
Okay.
And dollar-wise, it's about 1.3 to 1.4 million a year. And that is built into the 5-year forecast, that is going to come back into the fund balance to keep us at a level above that 17% or at that 17%.
So with that same question, since you put it out there, I didn't expect the answer tonight, but do you think that we're on track to have that average of 1.4 return back to this year's fund balance? Based on, I'm pretty sure you're probably watching.
We don't know yet fully what we're going to spend on COVID.
Right.
To this point, it hasn't been a huge dollar amount.
Okay.
But other than that, when you look at our revenue projections, we're almost $250,000 running under budget. So that's the hole that we're going to have to fill on, and some of it will be with that unexpended amount from the departments.
And that's not COVID related.
No.
Right.
So, and then you add on to that the transit, the coronavirus transit money that I mentioned, and then not funding vehicles. We had that vehicle fund, we didn't fund that. and facilities, we didn't fund that.
Right.
So I just don't, there were some things that were done to make that budget balance, and I just don't want to forget about those, because those are crucial things, just like you said at the very beginning, John, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. I would, as we go through this process, I would just, and I think we're kind of aware, a lot of times on these parking lot items, I always see a distinction between an item that becomes an ongoing expense to the city versus an item that's considered a one-year expense. And that's not to dissuade folks from the personnel adjustments, but, you know, that becomes a built-in expense, whereas vehicles and equipment, while they're spent in the next fiscal year, you know, they don't necessarily show up as that same item, even though police, we are continuously replacing vehicles. I guess I have a question for and maybe Councilmember Graham can provide some either this meeting or next meeting, the line item for the 225. I know that's designed to kind of be a placeholder for conversation to address that issue. Are you intending maybe some specificity there as to how that would be spent in terms of compression or moving salary ranges or increasing current pay for folks?
Yeah, I think that if it's approved, I think that's something that our finance director would sit down with our chief and then see where those moves can be made. Sitting here in my spot, I don't think any of us should be able to say where those funds should be boosted up to be. I think it should be left to the finance director and the chief, and I'm pretty sure he would have a conversation with maybe the FOP or something like that. But as far as, do I have an idea of, should a starting police officer, should it be 46, should it be 47? I don't know that. I do know the presentation that we had, and we looked at the comparisons, and those things was certainly startling to me, and I hope it was startling to everybody that's in this room as well, too. So
Thank you for that.
you're welcome.
I know it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and I think somebody quoted 800,000 to address that, and I can't remember what the source of that number was. I know the previous salary study talked about 300,000, I think, to address compression issues, but that data is 4 years old. And I know there's a difference between compression and salary ranges to fix here. I guess I want to make sure, like, I think of police personnel and the challenges faced there as a very big issue, that I want to make sure we've got the funds to address it and do it correctly. And I know that we did our best with the previous salary study to implement certain things, but I think our city administrator would say as well, like, we did part of it, but not addressing compression has created future issues that he warned us of. But we had, the funds we had available at the time is what we had available to address it. I just want to make sure that if we're really going to tackle that issue, then let's really address it. And I don't, in a larger sense, we have and I know we can have future meetings about this, we have a serious city revenue issue to finally unpack and start to deal with that. I think, you know, like I said at Monday night's council meeting, from last week's Public Works meeting, you know, stormwater talked about. We know that's a growing need. We know that there's vehicle needs. We know there's salary needs. The chair started tonight talking about COLA not actually keeping up with consumer price index here in the community for our employees. And so I think I feel like as a council, we're doing our best to communicate to the public that we have some real challenging budget times to address the needs of the community. I don't know if our message is getting through to folks that we've got to become creative about how we fix these things, as opposed to shaving off a couple thousand here and a couple thousand there in budget line items to patchwork together every year. I just have, when you look at these forecasts, I just have real concerns about the work that a lot of you in this room and on the phone have ahead of you over the coming years to make this all work. And so I'm certainly open to that personnel conversation and figuring out what exactly can be addressed and fixed and making sure that we're competitive in that way. I do think that's important. But I look at that list and that everything on that parking lot has value and is certainly needed, and we could probably add many, many, many more items to that list, and they're of critical need to our city. And I just have real concern that when you look at the revenue line items, it's just not growing as fast as it should. Well, not should. It's not growing as fast as it needs to keep up with the desires of the citizens in this community.
Thank you very much. And, I think it'd be a good idea if we carved out some time, dedicated it to discussion of, our revenue options into the future at Monday night's meeting. The next meeting of this committee will be Monday night at 5:30. And we'll meet again next Thursday as well. But on Monday night and on Thursday night next week, if necessary, even if we're not going to adopt or create the mechanisms for fixing the problem during this budget process, I'm optimistic about how much we'll be able to accomplish, but I think that might be a bridge too far for this particular process. But at least having the conversation and starting to get more thoughts out into the public is certainly a good idea during this process. Councilman Hussey?
Can I ask a follow-up on the Transit CARES Act funding, just so I'm clear? That was like a $2 million, and we spread it out over 3 years, correct? So roughly $650 a year and
In the
change?
2021 budget, it's $650,000.
650. So that would be, as Steve mentioned earlier, projecting forward when you add things, that's kind of the whole 650 to 700 that would need to be thought about 3 years down the line as being a big gap, right? Okay, thank you. I knew that we were saying 1.2 or 2, but I was thinking annual basis, I was thinking it was closer to that, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments by members of the committee or by staff? No? Well,
Could I just maybe follow up on Ken's point? Yes, but it depends on the purpose for which, you may be filling that hole. If you're filling it with something that's a reoccurring expense like salaries, then that is not only reoccurring, but it's also growing every year. If it's a fix that we plug it for a thing, some type of equipment or something, then that's just a one-time. So I just want to make sure that, it's 650, but if you're thinking of using that 650 for a purpose or plugging that hole for it with something else as a purpose, it makes a difference whether it's something that's reoccurring or just a one-time. A little confusing.
Follow up on another question, just related to the personnel. If salary ranges are adjusted in any way, does that take council action if they're adjusted specific to a classification as opposed to, I know when we have in the past approved the 2%, there's been a movement, but for example, if we decide to move certain ranges within the police department, will that take a council action to make happen? Or is that something that staff can do on their own?
I'm going to say yes to that, and particularly if you're moving police officers, or what we're talking about, police officers from a current range to a higher range.
So that would be, you're changing their grade level as opposed to moving
them within the range. Instead of doing that, you're actually moving them. And when you approve the budget, typically we've got all those things in there, and so when you approve the budget, you kind of approve that stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're going to make something change different than what's there, then yes. Now, I'm going to look at Gail and see if I get a yes on that. I got a mask shake yes on that, so.
Okay. And then, one thing that I noted when the Parks Department, I know they're not here this evening, but when their budget was presented, they had a large vacancy savings right now due to some vacant positions. And so I guess, and I know that they have some positions that are lost, maybe for whatever reason, and they just haven't filled them through this COVID time. Internally for us at the city, when a vacancy occurs, what's the thought, or like, is there an evaluation made to fill the position, or do we pause at times to, and I know at times we've reclassified positions, but if personnel makes up close to 80% of the budget, it's challenging on a council to fund a lot of things with the remaining 20% if they're not personnel related. Do we have a policy in place on like authorization to go back and fill that position immediately? Is it evaluated by department directors and Steve before it's given the go-ahead to post a position?
Is it a vacancy, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, I do have a discussion with department directors on pretty much every vacancy. Now, some of them that I know that we've talked about, like communication officers, operators, and police officers, we know that those are a need there, so those just go ahead and get filled. But we do have a conversation about vacancies and whether they're needed. And sometimes, is there a different way to maybe try to solve that? Sometimes it may be, we have ones and twos in many positions, so they talk a little bit about, well, maybe we could do a one and try to arrange that a little bit different, but we do have those conversations, yes.
Okay. I'm just thinking aloud, but just long-term to address some of these things that, I don't think anybody on the council wants to be in a position where you are directly eliminating people from positions, because a budget situation gets extremely tight down the line. But at some point, I would wonder if we have to rethink like overall staffing and number of positions and work through attrition to address some of that. Again, if revenues only grow negative 0.26% per year, I mean, that's not growth, but if they stay there and consumer price index continues to climb and replacement cost of vehicles and equipment, I think that a long-term perspective about how we staff the city and what that needs to look like certainly can take place. I just brought it up tonight because I know Parks identified it in their budget as they've got a number of vacancies right now in the budget, and I think that they were taking some look as to what to do with some of those positions.
Well, we do, and certainly during the tornado, we held off on filling some positions until I felt comfortable that we could go through and do that. So we have those but, think about what they are. Mostly police officers, mostly firefighters, and communication operators. I mean, those are crucial public safety, and then certainly a lot of support services.
Okay.
But now, there may be, to Councilmember Hensley's point, there may be some longer-term opportunities to look at maybe some cost-sharing opportunities with the county, for example, and some of those kinds of things that may take some conversation. But, those are some options for discussion, I guess.
Okay. Well, thank you for indulging my questions.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? We started a lot of good conversations tonight, and we have some items that have already been placed up as new spending items on the parking lot that we'll need to act on one way or the other on Monday, and we'll at that point also be discussing proposed sources for offsets for those items. And as I mentioned already a couple times, I think, Monday, August 24th, 5:30 p.m. at this point in this room, and then Thursday, the 27th, 5:30 p.m. at this point, also in this room. Are there any final comments or questions from Councilman Hussey?
I just have one more question, and this is just from experience on this. It seems like a lot of times this time of year, health insurance stuff comes in, and sometimes we realize that our health insurance costs in the coming year are going to be more or less than what we initially budgeted. Are we anticipating any change to that line item at all? And do we need to be prepared for that?
Give an update, Gail, and
I just want to make sure we don't
Yeah,
get
good question.
3 weeks down the road and realize
sure.
you got $90,000 to find because of an unexpected premium increase.
We are working with Wall Street Insurance on our health insurance renewals. I will be honest, our claims don't look great, only because we have some high claims. Our overall claims are actually fantastic, but we have a number of high dollar claims that are definitely going to impact our budget. Keep in mind that we are self-insured, so being self-insured, we can kind of ride those waves a little bit, as opposed to if we were fully insured, the insurance company would want that money each time. So we're still really in the process of determining exactly where it's going to need to fall, but we're working very hard on ensuring that we're kind of keeping that wave flat.
Wall Street's still out on the reinsurance?
Yeah, it's really what we're waiting on is the reinsurance. So they're shopping the reinsurance, trying to find some better options for us.
So we're not anticipating a major budget adjustment from what's in here right now?
Well, I mean,
Okay, I just,
again, if we wanted to fully cover the costs for the year, then yes, we would have to do something. But if we want to know that we are fully insured and that we're going to have good years and bad years, and so we kind of float the bill a little bit instead of throwing all the money into it immediately, then I think that we can kind of, like I said, ride that wave and kind of keep it flat.
okay,
So that's absolutely what our goal is.
all right, thank you.
So I think when the reinsurance comes in, we'll certainly have that discussion, and there may be a few options that we can talk about then too, once we get that quote in. And do you know the timing of that one? Should be getting kind of close here.
Yeah, they said, the end of August was the goal.
So, yeah.
Councilman Fitzwater.
Related to that, did they build any factors in related to if we had some COVID cases or some unusual expenses? Vaccines probably going to be out after the first of the year. Other expenses that might be unusual.
Yeah, actually, it's kind of interesting the way health insurance is working right now, because we're actually not seeing high costs for COVID. So you have the testing cost of it, but unless we have somebody hospitalized, actually the costs for health insurance for COVID are extremely low, if any. And then on the other side, people are going to the doctor less. And so some of the claims, overall just general claims are lower. So, I don't think that there's an emphasis or a thought that we need to put a lot in extra just to cover COVID, because those costs are low and we already are seeing the savings.
That could potentially work in our favor then.
It could, which, like I said, it can kind of help us ride that wave of because, like I said, we do have some pretty high dollar claims going right now.
Councilman Graham.
May I ask one final question? I promise this is my last one. Just to be clear, so that I'm clear and not clear as mud, can the parking fund enterprise be used for anything else other than parking?
Legally, it can. Is it a good fiscal practice? No.
But legally, yes.
Legally, it's part of, it is of the purview of the city council to vote on how to use those funds.
Okay.
Maybe I can just add a little bit to that, and, excuse me, Matt may want to add to it as well. I did want to mention that Chief Schofield is listening in, even though he's not here, he's listening in. So if there were some questions for him, certainly could ask. For the parking fund, remember, we've been building up that fund balance to do really two things. One was to maintain the existing garage, which is in dire need. We heard a little bit about that. And then also to fill a gap between what we think a new garage would need and what the bonds may be, and there may be a little bit of timing. So as you look at a lot of the past fund balance project lists, remember we got that long list of fund balance projects, we've always had some gap funding in there, and so that was part of that for the new garage as well. So
So I know that there are some some repairs that needs to take place on our current garage, correct?
Absolutely.
And so, I know there are some issues there, but I was just trying to, for some reason, was always under the impression that those funds, that enterprise cannot be touched. And, I guess I just wasn't asking the right question as it relates to that fund.
Right, and I might be able to fill in a little bit there. So that discretion likely disappears once you write bonds off
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
off the parking revenue. So it becomes a contractual obligation that the parking revenues will only go to pay off the bonds. And so, I think there may have been, this is just a guess, that there may have been some legacy from when the parking garage was originally financed. Yeah, absolutely, you could not use parking funds for anything but parking uses because you had a contractual obligation to pay off those bonds. But once those bonds get paid off, then that obligation goes away. But I think that there was like I said, a legacy of only using that for parking revenues.
So when are those bonds scheduled to be paid off?
The bonds are paid off. They've been paid off for decades now. But
Talking new bonds.
But if the city council were to issue new bonds for a new parking garage, for instance, then that flexibility, the legal flexibility to use parking funds for other things, while legal, that legality would go away. You would be obligated to only use parking funds to pay off the bonds. So it's if the city council is anticipating, building a new parking garage and writing bonds to do so, then the flexibility that, Margie describes goes away.
So currently, there are no bonds that's floating around the parking garage?
Correct.
It's paid off?
Yes.
And we do have a fund balance sitting in the parking fund area?
Well, I won't speak to the fund balance.
And the answer is yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
John?
Thank you so much.
Good. Just following up on that, on page 4 of the mayor's budget letter, first paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4, she mentions 2 additional funding suggestions previously mentioned to the city council for consideration to help reduce a portion of the general fund transfer include the following. 1, allocate some money from parking division for, in this particular case it says transit, but it could have been anything. And I do not recommend that option, she said.
Which page you want to see? I'm sorry.
Page 4 of the mayor's budget.
4 of 6?
Yes, page 4 of 6.
Okay.
Second paragraph below the highlighted, so
Okay.
kind of in the middle of the page, and then it goes on to another idea. So, that's always been identified as an option there, and certainly, as you noted, could be done if that's what council so chose.
And even though I have it already in here that I do not recommend that option, I will reiterate, I do not recommend the option of using parking funds for these other items other than parking, especially knowing that we have the imminent need of the upkeep and renovation to the current garage, much less some of the other things that we have. So, and for the bonding and some of the other reasons. And I also think that there's an expectation from the public as well as they utilize our parking services and pay the parking fees that is going towards this purpose. So just highly do not recommend using that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So another question, since we're on that, and I don't have those numbers in front of me. What's in the fund balance for the parking fund? What's that total amount that's in there?
It is in your big sheets in your book.
Yes.
If you turn to the second page of those summary pages, you'll see the airport parking, transit, and wastewater funds listed. And there is the FY19 audited fund balance reflected there for each one of those funds. So for parking, the FY19 audited fund balance total was $7.3 million, 2.3 is restricted, and almost $5 million is unrestricted.
So about $5 million is unrestricted. Okay, thank you.
Are there other fiscal policy downsides aside from what we've already discussed, to this practice, or have we kind of covered the why not in your view? You said it's not a good it's not a good practice from a fiscal policy perspective. Are there some identifiable downsides that you'd like to describe to us, or?
Well,
have we kind of
especially with the
gone through
fund that you're charging citizens for a service, and then you use it for something other than the intended revenue source. It's just not a fiscally sound practice to create these enterprise funds, have them be cost centers to support themselves and the future maintenance of the wastewater or parking garage or whatever it is, and then use it for another purpose.
I might just say it a little bit differently. Two of the funds that are supporting themselves, wastewater and parking, general fund is not, airport is not, transit is not, other than the coronavirus money that's been stuck in for airport and transit, which will go away in 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Fitzgerald.
Would it also be fair to say that part of the reason we have those fund balances is because former councils have not spent that money and have allowed for it to accrue for future needs?
Parking garage, yeah.
But I mean, that's a part or possibly a significant part of that fund balance. Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Mueller.
I just want to point out that what we have on displayed up there is the parking lot. There is a tab for each one of the different funds. So the page that we've been working on has been the general fund. I did want to point out, Chairman, that you had sent a handout with some things funded from the sales tax G. So that is what is up on the screen now, is the proposal that you have to decrease the contingency line in sales tax G by $450,000 and use the funding for Fire Station 4 rehab and for some of the fire radio replacements.
Yeah, thank you very much. And would it be possible for the committee to get a copy of the current state of the parking lot between now and the next meeting?
Yeah, we can email it to you tomorrow morning.
That'd be great. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Are there any motions?
I do have a
Oh.
question about, on this particular item where it says decrease contingency, if that could be explained what that contingency is? I mean, it's
only listed as contingency, and I'm not aware of a firm funding requirement. And last year, there was $61,000 or so spent, and I don't think in any prior year there was anything to it.
It is identified for MSP development.
Where?
It's in just discussions. It's not anything in the title.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not aware of us committing to $550,000 of specific spending for MSP next year. Anyhow, I guess we can discuss that next time.
I believe Matt has his hand up back there.
Yeah,
Oh.
I mean, just so everybody knows, when we did the sales tax discussions and
Matt, you might want to get a microphone so that those who are listening in via the web can hear what you're saying.
yeah, when we, just make it clear, when we did those sales tax discussions with the committees supporting those, that was kind of in the bottom category. It's actually called, if I remember right, contingency / economic development in the city. And then discussions followed that would be targeted for MSP, but that was the official, I think, the official title. And I even think Steve's got the sheet in his hand. Yeah. That looks like here. And the total budget was, my glasses back there, $2.25 million over the 5 years. And the way it had been done in the past, over other sales taxes, is when we if the sales tax for some, ran short for whatever reason, economic reasons, they would cut that item. That's why it was labeled contingency, but if it had money in it, it would be targeted toward that title, just like parks or public safety or public works. So I just want to give everybody the background on that.
Thanks. Are there other sales tax G monies dedicated to MSP projects next year?
Yeah, then there's, within if you look at the top of this sheet, there's a Public Works section, and then it says at the top one, City County Cooperative Projects, and so within that, we have a matching with the county for MSP as well.
And is the total somewhere around $1.2 million potentially?
For the city, it's 2 million total for city and county.
For next year?
Well, that becomes a cash flow thing, which year it's in or whatever. But yeah, basically by the end of it, we'll still have our $1 million available for MSP, and then we anticipate the county should as well.
So if all of that stayed in there, we'd have $1.5 million of sales tax G money dedicated to MSP next fiscal year.
Including the contingency part is what you're saying?
Including the contingency.
Yeah, I guess I could say that.
Assuming it all came in.
Assuming it all came in.
Right. And do we have $1.55 million worth of projects lined up for MSP next year?
Yeah, when we did that EDA grant look, we originally applied for, I think it was almost $7 million-ish.
7.2.
What's that?
7.2.
And then some of that was grant, of course, and that was matching. I think the EDA folks have recently come back and cut that to 1.5-ish, I want to say. And so there's obviously a big need for, and that was infrastructure money, so that's what that matching, so we'd still have to match, but we'd have to match at a higher percentage just to try to get that grant.
So we're having to find more city funds.
Well, yeah, it would just be these funds here is all we would have available unless we wanted to put new money towards it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
It would be helpful if Margie mailed that out in the morning too, emailed that chart out.
Sure.
Maybe just help.
Yeah, this was the original, kind of
refresh everybody's memory, yeah.
See the date on it, maybe on there somewhere. But anyway, that was kind of what the original one was,
That way,
about almost 4 years ago now.
Subject to action.
4 years ago, you said?
What's that?
Did you say 4 years ago?
Yeah, whenever the sales tax was up to 2017-ish, I guess 16 now.
Yeah. Moves fast, doesn't it? I know.
Okay.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the county's actually ends in 21. We go 4 months past, so we have that 4 months collection past them. But theirs should all be in the 2021 budget.
All right, any other comments or questions? Do we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We'll see everybody on Monday.
That's the new sample. Wait, from Lori, the sales rep. Okay.
At some point.